Most people would have turned the lock and pretended they didn't hear the knocking, but one woman didn't, and the world found out what happened next. The wind was hitting the house so hard that it sounded like someone was dragging metal across the walls. Snow wasn't just falling, it was piling sideways, sticking to the windows until Mariana Cole could barely see past her own reflection. It was close to midnight in rural Montana, the kind of night when even the highway goes silent and every neighbor disappears behind locked doors. Mariana stood in her kitchen, wearing a thick sweater with a stain on the sleeve she hadn't bothered trying to fix. Her 11-year-old son, Drew, was upstairs, finally asleep after complaining that the power kept flickering. She tried to warm her hands around a mug of instant coffee, even though it had already gone cold. The wood stove in the living room was the only thing keeping the house from turning into a freezer. She wasn't expecting anything, not visitors, not phone calls, definitely not this. The first knock wasn't even a knock. It was more like someone hitting the door with the side of their arm. Then came another harder this time. Mariana froze, not terrified, but alert, the way single parents get when they know there's nobody else to rely on. She whispered to herself, "Not tonight. Please, not tonight." The knocking came again, rapid and desperate. She walked toward the door slowly, each step loud against the old wooden floor. The house was small, 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, and walls thin enough that Drew could hear everything if he wasn't in such deep sleep. She glanced toward the stairs anyway, just in case. "Who is it?" she called out, trying to sound firm. A voice answered, but the wind almost tore it away. "We need help." She couldn't even tell how many people were outside. She peeked through the small window beside the door, but all she saw was darkness and moving shapes. Not animals, not one person, multiple. Her heart kicked harder. Another voice yelled, "Please, someone's gonna freeze out here." Mariana's first instinct wasn't kindness. It was fear. Not the dramatic kind, just the logical kind any woman living alone would feel when strangers show up in the middle of a storm. She reached for her phone, but the screen flashed a warning, no service. Of course. She kept the chain lock on and opened the door just an inch. The cold slapped her across the face, sending a burst of snow into the hallway. Standing outside were men, lots of them. Their jackets were covered in ice, and their beards held frozen breath. Some didn't even have gloves. Behind them, she could barely make out motorcycles tipped over in the snow, half buried like abandoned toys. A man closest to the door tried to smile, but his lips were shaking too hard. "Ma'am," he said, voice cracking, "we're not here for trouble. Our bikes slid out. The road's shut down. The gas station in town is locked up. We need heat before someone passes out." Mariana didn't respond right away. She looked at their faces, red, raw, exhausted. These weren't kids messing around. They weren't drunk. They were freezing. "How many of you?" she asked. 25, another man answered. She repeated it in her head. 25. Inside her house, with barely any food and a stove that needed constant feeding? "No," she almost said out loud. But then she noticed one of the men leaning against another, barely able to stand. His eyes looked unfocused, like he wasn't fully present anymore. Mariana swallowed hard. She knew what hypothermia looked like. Years ago, Drew's father had worked search and rescue before leaving their lives behind. She remembered the symptoms because he talked about it more than he talked about anything else. She opened the door wider, just a little. "Don't touch anything. Don't go upstairs. You come in, you stay in the living room. Understood?" A few of them nodded fast, like they didn't want to risk losing the chance. The cold air rushed in as they stepped through the door one by one, boots dripping onto the floor. The house suddenly felt smaller than it ever had. Mariana's heart was beating so fast she could hear it in her ears. She didn't know these men. She didn't know what they wanted. All she knew was that they were desperate, and she had made a choice she couldn't take back. But she had no idea that letting them inside her home would change everything that came after. The heat from the wood stove didn't reach the doorway fast enough. As the men stepped inside, the living room filled with the smell of wet leather and cold air trapped in their clothes. Snow melted into puddles around their boots, and Mariana grabbed an old towel from the hall closet, tossing it onto the floor without saying anything else. The man who had spoken first pulled off his gloves, revealing red, swollen hands. "Thank you," he said, voice more steady now. I'm Brent Lawson. We didn't mean to scare you. Mariana didn't shake his hand. She just pointed toward the living room. Sit, all of you, and don't wake my son. Brent nodded and turned to the others. You heard the lady. Keep it quiet. The group moved slowly, like they were afraid the floor might break under them. They settled near the stove, rubbing their hands together, breathing into their palms. One of the younger bikers, maybe mid-20s, winced as he tried to bend his fingers. Mariana noticed. What's wrong with him? She asked. Brent turned. That's Cody. He was out longest trying to get the last bike upright. He can't feel his hands. Mariana walked over, keeping a safe distance. Cody's skin looked waxy, and his fingertips were turning pale. You need to warm up slowly, she said. Don't put them too close to the heat. Cody let out a shaky breath. Yes, ma'am. Brent's eyebrows lifted slightly. You know about this stuff? My son's dad used to work rescue, she replied. I paid attention. There was a brief silence. Not tense, just uncomfortable. Like everyone was trying to pretend they weren't strangers, sitting in the same room at midnight. One of the men near the back cleared his throat. We tried the motel in Livingston. Nobody answered. Power's down. We were going to sleep outside if we had to. Mariana crossed her arms. In this weather, you'd be done by morning. A few of them exchanged looks, as if admitting she was right made everything feel more real. The stove popped loudly, and Drew's footsteps creaked from upstairs. Mariana's head snapped toward the hallway. Stay here, she whispered sharply. She hurried toward the stairs before anyone could say another word. Drew stood halfway down, wrapped in a blanket, hair sticking up. Mom, who are those people? Mariana crouched beside him. Don't worry, they're stuck because of the storm. They're staying in the living room until it's safe. His eyes widened. All of them? Just go back to bed, she said softly. Lock your door, I'll check on you soon. Drew didn't argue. That scared her more than anything. He turned around and disappeared into his room. When she returned to the living room, Brent stood up, but gently, hands visible. We'll leave as soon as it's safe, he said. We're not trying to cause trouble. Mariana stared at him for a moment. His beard was still coated with ice, and his eyelashes held tiny flakes that hadn't melted yet. You hungry? She finally asked. A few men looked up, almost surprised by the question. We've got some jerky in our bags, Brent replied. We're fine. That wasn't the question, she said. I don't have much, but I can make something. Cody tried to smile. Anything warm would help. Mariana walked into the kitchen, opening cabinets she already knew were nearly empty. A box of pasta, half a jar of sauce, a loaf of bread starting to go hard on the edges. It would have to do. She filled a pot with water and set it on the stove. For the first time that night, the house felt quiet. Not peaceful, just paused. In the doorway, Brent leaned against the frame. You really didn't have to let us in, he said quietly. Mariana didn't turn around. She watched the burner flicker as the flame caught. Yeah, she answered, but leaving you out there wasn't an option either. Brent exhaled slowly, like he'd been holding his breath since the storm started. We won't forget this, he said. Mariana didn't reply. She just kept stirring the pot, pretending her hands weren't shaking. But the longer the night went on, the more she realized the danger wasn't only outside, because trust doesn't come easy when strangers are sitting in your living room. The pasta didn't stretch far, but nobody complained. Mariana served it in mismatched bowls, some ceramic, some plastic, because that's all she had. The men ate slowly, like their bodies were still catching up to the fact that they were safe and warm. The living room lights flickered again, and everyone paused in the same instant, waiting to see if the power would disappear for good. When the bulbs steadied, a few men let out breath they didn't realize they were holding. Cody leaned back against the couch cushions. This is the best meal I've had in weeks. Mariana raised an eyebrow. That's either a compliment or your cooking standards are low. A couple of them chuckled, not loud, just enough to take the sharp edge off the moment. Brent sat nearest the stove, stretching his hands toward the heat, but keeping a respectful distance. We were riding through from Billings, supposed to stop in Spokane by morning. Didn't think the storm would hit like this. Mariana folded the dish towel in her hands. Storm warnings have been on the radio for 2 days. We don't listen to the radio much, another man said. His name was Vaughn. He had a scar above one eyebrow and a voice that sounded like gravel. "So you decided to ride across Montana in a blizzard without checking the weather?" Mariana asked. Vaughn shrugged. "We've made worse choices." The honesty caught her off guard. She almost smiled, but stopped herself. From upstairs, a soft thud sounded, followed by silence. Brent noticed her glance toward the hallway. "You want us gone?" he said. It wasn't a question. Mariana didn't answer right away. She rinsed bowls in the sink, keeping the faucet low so the pipes wouldn't shake. "I want everyone to stay alive," she finally said. "But I don't know any of you, and I have a kid in this house." Brent adjusted his jacket. "You're right to be careful. If it was my kid, I'd feel the same." The room softened again, not comfortable, just less sharp. One of the youngest bikers, a guy with freckles and a shaved head, cleared his throat. "We can sleep sitting up. Nobody's asking for beds or blankets." "You'll need blankets if someone's body temp drops," Mariana replied. "We'll take the floor," Brent added. Mariana took a beat, then walked to the hallway closet and started pulling out whatever she could find. 2 old sleeping bags, a stack of faded quilts, and a knitted throw her aunt made years earlier. She tossed them onto the couch. "That's all I've got." "It's plenty," Brent said. As the men settled in, the storm outside grew even louder. The wind pushed against the house so hard that the walls trembled. Snow slapped against the glass like handfuls of sand. Vaughn stood and peered through the window. "Road's gone. Can't even see the fence line." Mariana joined him, keeping a safe distance. Everything outside was white. No sky, no ground, just moving frost. She whispered, "I hope the roof holds." "It will," Vaughn replied. "This place is old. Old things don't fall apart easy." Mariana turned her head. "That's supposed to be comforting?" He almost smiled. "Did it work?" "Not really." The lights flickered again, longer this time. Cody's eyes darted toward the stove. "If the power goes, can that thing keep us warm?" he asked. "As long as I have wood," Mariana said. Brent straightened. "We can help with that." Before she could argue, a few of them stood up. Vaughn grabbed a flashlight from his jacket, and Brent pulled on his gloves. "You're not going back out there," Mariana said. "We won't go far," Brent replied. "Just the woodpile." Mariana hesitated. She didn't like the idea of anyone stepping into that storm, but if the stove died, the house would freeze. "Fine," she said, "but you stick together. No wandering." Brent held her gaze for a moment. "You have my word." The door opened, and the wind punched into the house like a living thing. Snow swirled inside before the door slammed shut again. The remaining men sat quietly, listening for movement outside. Minutes passed, then footsteps returned, heavy and fast. Brent and the others burst back inside, covered in snow but carrying armfuls of wood. Vaughn shook off his jacket. "Your woodpile was buried. We dug until we found it." Mariana didn't know what to say. Her throat felt tight. "Thank you," she finally whispered. Brent set the wood down near the stove. "We're not here to take anything from you." She met his eyes. "I hope that stays true." The storm raged through the night, but the house held firm, and so did the unspoken agreement between them. But as the hours stretched on, Mariana realized surviving the night was only the first problem, because trust has a way of turning into something far more complicated when morning comes. By 3 a.m, most of the men had fallen asleep sitting upright, their heads resting against the backs of chairs or slumped forward with arms crossed. The wood stove crackled steadily, casting a warm orange glow across the room. Shadows stretched across the walls, making the space look smaller, tighter, almost like the house was breathing with them. Mariana sat at the edge of the kitchen table, too alert to sleep. Every sound pulled her attention. The shifting of boots on the floor, the stove popping, the wind battering the siding. She kept her eyes on the living room, watching strangers sleep under blankets that once belonged to her son. Brent was still awake. He sat near the stove, elbows resting on his knees, staring into the flames like he was trying to replay the last 12 hours and make sense of how they got here. "You don't sleep much, do you?" he asked quietly. Mariana didn't move. "Not when my house is full of people I don't know." Brent gave a slow nod. "Fair enough." For a moment, neither spoke. The heat murmured through the room. Drew hadn't made a sound upstairs, which was both a relief and a weight pressing on Mariana's chest. She took a breath. "How long have you been riding with them?" "Since I was 19, Brent replied. "Used to be different back then." What changed? He rubbed the back of his neck, thinking. People think they know us because of what they've heard, but most of us, we're just trying to stay alive like anybody else. Mariana raised an eyebrow. That's supposed to make me feel better? Brent almost smiled, but it faded fast. No, I'm just saying things aren't always what they look like. Across the room, Vaughn shifted awake and sat up slowly, stretching his back. He noticed Mariana watching him. Sorry, he muttered. Didn't mean to doze off. You're fine, she said. Just try not to snore. Cody, half asleep on the rug, mumbled, Too late for that. A few quiet laughs slipped through the room before settling again. Brent leaned back against the wall. You live out here alone with your boy? Mariana hesitated. I work part-time at the clinic in Livingston. We don't have anyone else around. Not anymore. Brent didn't push, but his eyes softened. That's a heavy load. It's life, she said simply. Vaughn rubbed his hands together. You ever think about leaving? Moving somewhere with less snow and more people? Sure, Mariana answered. But leaving costs money. Staying costs patience. I'm better at the second one. Silence filled the room again, but this time it wasn't tense. It felt like everyone understood something without needing to say it. The stove crackled louder, and Brent glanced toward the window. Storm slowing down. Mariana checked the glass. Snow was still falling, but now it drifted instead of slamming sideways. Sun should be up in a few hours, she said. Cody pushed himself up, wincing a little less than before. If the roads are clear, we can move out. Won't bother you any longer. Mariana shook her head. Clear roads or not, nobody's leaving until the temperature comes up. I'm not letting anyone freeze after making it through the night. Brent smiled softly. Didn't think you'd care this much. Mariana met his eyes. Don't read too far into it. I just don't want anyone dying in my yard. A few of them chuckled again, but it wasn't forced. It felt human, almost normal. Vaughn stretched his legs. We can help with breakfast. We're not completely useless. Mariana raised an eyebrow. You cook? Better than Cody, he replied. Cody groaned. That's not a high bar. Brent stood slowly. We'll stay out of your way. Just tell us what you need. Mariana looked around the room, at the blankets, the melting snow, the strangers who no longer felt like a threat but still weren't familiar. You don't touch the knives, she said. Other than that, we'll figure it out. Brent nodded once. Deal. The storm outside faded into a low whisper, the house finally settling after hours of shaking. But as the sky began to lighten, none of them had any idea that the quiet morning waiting for them would be nothing compared to what was headed their way next. By the time the first gray light slipped across the snow-covered yard, the wind had finally calmed. The storm hadn't stopped, but it had softened into a steady fall, quiet enough that Mariana could hear her own thoughts again. The men were awake now, stretching stiff muscles and brushing dried ice from their jackets. Cody's hands had regained most of their color, and Vaughn was organizing the blankets into a neat pile without being asked. Mariana stood at the kitchen counter, slicing the last of the bread into thin pieces. She wasn't sure if it would be enough, but something warm was better than nothing. Brent stepped quietly into the kitchen. We can help with that. Mariana shook her head. You've done enough. He leaned against the doorway, not crossing the line she'd made clear. We'd still like to earn our keep. She hesitated. Fine. Toast these on the stove, but don't burn anything. Brent smirked. No promises. When the bread began browning, the smell drifted through the house, waking Drew before Mariana could go check on him. He came downstairs slowly, still wrapped in his blanket, stopping when he noticed all the men watching him. Brent stepped back, giving him space. Morning, kid. Drew looked at his mom for reassurance. Mariana nodded. They're leaving soon, she said gently. It's all right. Drew swallowed and walked into the kitchen, sliding into a chair. Can I have some? Of course, Mariana answered, placing a slice on a plate. Cody tried to wave at him with his bandaged hand. Sorry if we scared you last night. Drew didn't speak, but he gave a small nod. Breakfast was simple. Toast, heated canned soup, and water warmed in a pot. But the room felt lighter than it had hours ago. The men talked quietly among themselves, discussing routes and weather patterns like they hadn't just lived through a night that could have ended badly. After they finished eating, Brent helped stack the bowls in the sink. We'll head out once the road looks safe, he said. We don't want to overstay. Mariana dried her hands on a dish towel. Overstaying would have been banging on my door again tonight. This, she gestured around the room, was surviving. Brent nodded gratefully. Still, we owe you. Vaughn started gathering firewood into a neater pile. We'll clear the driveway before we go. Last thing you need is getting stuck if something happens. Mariana blinked. You don't have to. We want to, Vaughn interrupted, adjusting his gloves. Before she could argue again, the men pulled on their jackets and stepped outside. The cold hit them, but compared to the night before, it felt almost forgiving. Mariana watched from the doorway as they shoveled snow using old tools she kept in the shed. They moved fast, working together without needing to speak. Within an hour, her driveway was clear, and the path to the road was visible again. Brent knocked lightly on the doorframe. We're going to get moving. Mariana looked at the group, faces no longer red and frozen, but alive and steady. Take care of yourselves, she said. Cody smiled. You too, ma'am. Brent pulled on his helmet, but paused before fastening it. We don't forget people like you. Mariana crossed her arms. Just keep your promises to whoever's waiting for you. Brent gave a single, thoughtful look. Not dramatic, just real, and joined the others. The engines started one by one, low and controlled, nothing like the roaring pack she expected. They didn't rush. They didn't tear out of the driveway. They left carefully, almost respectfully, fading into the quiet, snowy road. Mariana stood there long after they disappeared, breathing an air that felt too still. Drew stepped beside her. Are they coming back? She placed a hand on his shoulder. No, she said softly. That was the end of it. But even as she spoke, a small uneasiness tugged at her chest. Not fear, just the strange feeling that life had shifted in some direction she couldn't see yet. She closed the door and locked it, thinking the chapter was finished. But sometimes, the things we think are over are only waiting for the right moment to return, and this wasn't the end of anything. The house felt strangely empty once the last motorcycle faded into the distance. Mariana closed the curtains and tried to pretend everything was normal again, but normal didn't return as easily as she hoped. The living room still smelled like smoke and leather, and the blankets they used were piled on the couch, waiting to be washed. She moved through the house slowly, picking up bowls, wiping the counters, doing the kinds of chores people do when they're trying not to think too hard. Drew sat at the kitchen table with his cereal, staring at the window like he was waiting for something to reappear. You're quiet, Mariana said. Drew stirred his spoon. It's weird that they're gone. You didn't even know them, she reminded him gently. Yeah, but it feels like the house is too big now. Mariana didn't respond. She understood more than she wanted to admit. By mid-morning, the sky had turned a dull white, and the town plow truck crawled slowly down the road toward Livingston, clearing what was left of the storm's path. It should have made her feel better. Instead, she kept checking the window like someone might be walking up the driveway again. She tried turning the TV on for background noise, but the satellite wasn't receiving a signal. The cell phone still showed no bars. Isolation wasn't new to her. Living in Montana meant entire days without visitors, but something about today felt different. At around 10, she heard the crunch of tires on snow outside. Her stomach tightened. She moved to the front window and pulled the curtain just enough to see a beige pickup truck stopping near the end of her driveway. It was her neighbor, Warren Hayes, from 2 houses down, one of the only homes within a mile. He stepped out wearing a heavy jacket and waved. Mariana opened the door. Morning, she called. Warren walked up halfway. Heard the plows finally came through. You doing all right out here? We're fine, Mariana replied. You lose power? Off and on. Warren nodded slowly, then lowered his voice. Heard a rumor that some bikers came through last night. Mariana's shoulders stiffened. Who told you that? Guy who runs the gas station in town, Warren said. Said someone saw a bunch of bikes tipped over near the highway. Mariana kept her face neutral. They needed a place to warm up. They're gone now. Warren scratched his chin. You let 20-something strangers in your house? I didn't have much of a choice. Warren sighed. Montana's a hard place to live soft. Mariana narrowed her eyes. What's that supposed to mean? He raised his hands. Not judging, just saying folks talk. And when they talk, they add pieces that weren't there. She crossed her arms. Well, nobody needs to add anything about me. Warren nodded. I'll keep it quiet. Just wanted to check on you. Mariana softened slightly. Thanks. He headed back to his truck, but paused before getting in. If anything weird happens, call me. I'm only 5 minutes up the road." "All right," she said. The truck pulled away, leaving the road empty again. Drew came to the doorway. "Mom, why would people talk about us?" Mariana closed the door gently. "Because people like stories more than truth." Drew frowned. "Are we in trouble?" "No," she said firmly. "We helped, that's all." He nodded, but his eyes didn't relax. The afternoon crawled by. Mariana washed blankets, swept the floors, and tried to settle the strange feeling sitting in her chest. The house was quiet, too quiet, and the silence felt like it was waiting for something. At around 4, Drew was upstairs doing homework when Mariana stepped outside to shake out a rug. The air was colder again, sharp enough to bite her fingertips. That was when she heard it. Not an engine, not one motorcycle, dozens. The sound was distant at first, low, steady, and growing. Mariana turned toward the highway, confusion tightening into disbelief. More engines joined, then more. The ground vibrated beneath her boots. She stepped backward toward the door, her breath turning short and fast. The road that had been empty all morning was now filling with motorcycles, row after row, stretching farther than she could count. Not roaring, not racing, just arriving. Mariana's hand trembled as she reached for the doorknob. But what was coming toward her wasn't fear. It was something so massive and unexpected that even the storm couldn't compare. Mariana backed into the house and shut the door, but she didn't lock it. She just stood there, listening as the sound outside grew louder and deeper. Not chaotic, just steady, like a heartbeat spreading across the valley. Drew rushed down the stairs. "Mom, what's happening?" She didn't answer right away. She walked to the window and pulled the curtain back just enough to see. Motorcycles lined the entire road, rows stretching so far that the end disappeared around the bend. Riders wore heavy jackets patched with symbols she didn't recognize, and every single bike was parked with the engine shut off. Not one person was shouting. Nobody was moving toward her house. They just stood beside their bikes, quiet, waiting. Drew's voice shook. "Are they here for us?" Mariana swallowed. "Get back upstairs." "But—" "Now, Drew." He hesitated, then turned and hurried up the steps. She took one slow breath, then opened the front door. The cold hit her face, but she barely felt it. Every rider within sight turned their attention toward her, not hostile, just focused. A man stepped forward from the first row. He wasn't the biggest, but he carried himself like someone who didn't need to prove anything. His beard was streaked with gray, and his jacket looked older than some of the men standing behind him. He stopped several feet away, keeping a respectful distance. "You Mariana Cole?" he asked. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried across the entire crowd. "Yes," she answered, her own voice steady, even though her hands were shaking inside her pockets. The man nodded once. "Name's Ray Del Vecchio." The name didn't mean anything to her, but a few riders behind him shifted slightly, like it meant a whole lot to them. Ray continued, "We heard what you did last night." Mariana frowned. "I didn't do anything except keep people from freezing." Ray's eyes softened. "You opened your door. Most wouldn't have." She crossed her arms, partly for warmth, partly for control. "Why are there so many of you here?" Ray took a slow breath. "Those 25 men you helped, they're part of us. Word traveled fast. Some rode all night to get here." "That doesn't explain this," she said, motioning toward the endless line of bikes. Ray didn't get defensive. He just nodded slowly. "We came to make sure nobody gives you trouble for what you did, and to tell you, face to face, that you're not alone out here." Mariana shook her head slightly. "I didn't ask for protection." "We know," Ray replied. "That's why it matters." For a moment, neither spoke. Snowflakes drifted between them, soft and slow. Then Ray reached into his jacket, and Mariana's muscles tensed, but he only pulled out a folded piece of paper. "This is from Brent," he said, holding it out. Mariana stepped forward cautiously and took it. The handwriting was uneven, like someone wrote it on the road. It said, "You didn't treat us like animals. You saved us. If you ever need anything, we come running. No questions." Brent had signed his name at the bottom. Mariana folded the note, her throat tight. "I didn't do it for a thank you." Ray nodded. "That's why you're getting one." Behind him, more motorcycles rolled in quietly from the distance, adding to the long line already stretching across the road. It wasn't loud. It wasn't wild. It was something else entirely. Organized. Intentional. Ray stepped back a few feet. We'll be gone soon. We're not here to crowd you or scare your kid. Just needed you to know you're seen. Mariana didn't know what to say. The wind tugged at her coat, and she pulled it tighter. Ray gave a small nod. One more thing. She waited. You ever need help, whether it's a broken fence or something bigger, you call the number in that note. Someone will answer. Doesn't matter what time it is. Mariana stared at him. Why would strangers do that? Ray's expression didn't change. Because you didn't treat us like strangers. He turned and walked back toward his bike. As he did, every rider followed his lead, mounting their motorcycles without a single signal spoken aloud. Engines started, not roaring, but steady, rolling away in long, organized rows. Drew appeared at the window upstairs, watching with wide eyes as the road slowly emptied. Within minutes, the crowd was gone, leaving only silence and tire tracks cutting through the snow. Mariana stood alone on the porch, the note still in her hand, unsure whether to feel relieved or overwhelmed. But what she didn't realize yet was that their visit wasn't the real ending. It was only the beginning of how her small act would ripple through lives far beyond her own. Mariana closed the door slowly, like shutting it too fast might erase everything that just happened. The house was quiet again. No engines, no voices, no strangers breathing warmth into the walls. Drew came downstairs, stepping softly as if the floor might make noise it shouldn't. Are they really gone? He asked. Mariana held up the folded note. Yeah, they're gone. Drew stared at it. What did it say? She handed it to him without speaking. Drew read it silently, then looked up with a confused kind of seriousness only kids have. They want to help us? Mariana gave a half shrug. Looks that way. He studied her face. Are you scared? She took a moment before answering. I don't know what I am. Drew sat beside her. I'm not scared, he said, though his voice wasn't fully confident. She placed an arm around his shoulders. You don't have to pretend. They sat in silence for a few seconds, just listening to the house settle. The wood stove crackled softly, and the leftover warmth wrapped around them like a blanket that didn't quite reach the edges. Later that afternoon, Mariana stood outside, sweeping the front steps. The air felt different. Not lighter, not heavier, just changed. The snow on the road was marked with hundreds of tire tracks, lines crisscrossing like someone had drawn paths without considering where they led. Warren's pickup appeared again, slowing to a stop at the end of the driveway. He rolled down his window. You all right? He called. Mariana leaned on the broom. Why does everyone keep asking me that? Because nobody's ever seen what happened today, he said. Not out here. She didn't argue. Warren stepped out of the truck and walked up a few feet. You need anything? We're fine. He nodded, but didn't move yet. My wife was talking about bringing you a casserole later, not because of the bikers, because the storm wiped out half the pantry. Mariana blinked. She doesn't need to do that. She wants to, he replied. Let people be decent sometimes. Mariana didn't say yes. She didn't say no either. Warren gave a small wave and walked back to his truck. Inside, Drew was sitting at the kitchen table, sketching something on notebook paper. When Mariana stepped in, he turned the page around. It was a drawing of motorcycles, dozens of them, lined up along a road. In the center was a small house, with smoke coming from the chimney. I wanted to remember, he said quietly. Mariana brushed her thumb across the corner of the page. It won't always feel this big. It already doesn't, Drew said. Last night felt bigger. She smiled a little. Yeah, it did. They spent the evening doing normal things, laundry, dinner, homework, dishes, but even simple tasks felt slightly off balance, like the house was still adjusting to being itself again. As the sky turned dark, Mariana stepped onto the porch one more time. The cold pressed against her coat, but she didn't move right away. She looked out at the road, now empty except for the fading tracks that would be gone by morning. She thought about Brent, about the frost in his beard, and the gratitude in his voice. She thought about Ray, speaking calmly while hundreds waited behind him. She thought about every moment she could have closed the door, every instinct that told her not to trust a single person standing in the snow. She whispered to the air, "Why me?" There was no answer, just the wind brushing past her. Later that night, after Drew was asleep, Mariana sat at the kitchen table with the note unfolded in front of her. She traced the writing with her finger, not the words, but the pressure behind them. Someone had written this inside a moving vehicle, maybe half frozen, maybe exhausted, but certain. She looked at the phone sitting beside her. Still no service. It didn't matter. Something inside her had shifted. Not like a dramatic revelation, just a quiet understanding she couldn't ignore. She hadn't saved anyone because she was fearless. She wasn't fearless at all. She had been terrified the entire night. Terrified of strangers. Terrified of choosing wrong. Terrified of what might happen if she opened the door and what might happen if she didn't. But she opened it anyway. The next morning, Drew found her making pancakes, real ones, not from a box, using the last of the flour. "You're up early," he said through a yawn. Mariana flipped the pancake onto his plate. Figured today could be normal. He sat down. "Do you think we'll ever see them again?" Mariana thought about it, not just the possibility, but what it would mean. "If we do," she said, "it won't be because they owe us. It'll be because people remember when someone treated them like they mattered." Drew nodded slowly. "Is that the lesson?" She smiled. "Maybe the lesson is that helping someone doesn't make you weak. It makes you human." He took a bite, chewing thoughtfully. "Do you think other people would have opened the door?" Mariana didn't answer right away. She stared out the window, at the snow, the fence line, the quiet road. "I don't know," she said, "but I hope they would." They finished breakfast in comfortable silence. As Drew gathered his school books, Mariana folded the note one last time and placed it inside a kitchen drawer, not hidden, just kept. Before closing it, she whispered, "Just in case." She didn't mean in case of danger. She meant in case she ever forgot who she was when fear tried to make her someone else. Sometimes the world tells you to shut the door. Sometimes survival feels like isolation. Sometimes people judge before they understand. But every now and then, kindness travels farther than the storm that started it. In the smallest choice, a bowl of pasta, a warm room, a door opened when it didn't feel safe, can reach people you may never meet. Not because you asked for anything, not because you wanted something in return, but because someone needed help and you didn't turn away. So if you're listening right now, remember this. You never know the size of the impact you're making when you do the right thing, even when nobody's watching. And if you've ever been helped by someone who didn't have to help you, pass it forward. Someone out there needs you more than you think.